Imagine someone you meet who says they are perfectly loving, kind, and just. But then you find out they once ordered an entire group of people to be wiped out. Men, women, children, even infants. Not because they attacked first, but just because they lived in the wrong place. How would you feel about that person? Would you trust them? Would you believe they're good? This isn't a random story. It's a story straight from the Bible. And it raises a serious question. If we apply the same moral standards we use in real life to the God of the Bible, does he live up to them? Let's talk honestly and calmly about it. I know for many people God is sacred. It's not easy to question something you were raised with. But just for a few minutes, let's set aside assumptions and look closely at what the Bible says about God's actions and character, especially in the Old Testament. Let's ask, if we didn't already believe this was God, would we call this behavior good or monstrous? One of the clearest examples is in the book of 1 Samuel chapter 15. God commands King Saul to kill every Amalekite, including all the women, babies, children, and even their animals. Think about that. Babies and infants. No crime, no rebellion, just born to the wrong people. Would we accept this if any nation did it today? If a general ordered the killing of all civilians, including babies, we would call it genocide. The world would be outraged. Yet, because it's in the Bible, many people try to justify it. Some say, well, God's justice is higher than ours. But here's the problem. If we can't recognize goodness when we see it, if we need to call evil good, just because it's attributed to God, then how do we know what's good at all? Morality can't be real if it only applies when it's convenient. If killing babies is evil when humans do it, then it's evil no matter who commands it. Now let's talk about the story of the flood. In Genesis, God wipes out the entire world. Men, women, children, elderly animals, everything that breathes, except for one family. Why? Because people were sinful. But again, let's ask honestly, would we call it justice to punish every single person for the mistake of a few, including children who had no say in the matter? In any human legal system, we would never accept that. We believe in individual responsibility. But the God of the Bible doesn't seem to follow that principle. We often hear that God is love, that God is just, that God is merciful. And yes, those are important ideas. But when we read the Bible, we see a God who punishes people harshly, often for things that seem small or even understandable. Take the story of Uzzah in 2 Samuel 6. The Ark of the Covenant was being transported, and it started to fall. Uzzah instinctively reached out to steady it, and God struck him dead on the spot. No warning, no second chance, just death for trying to help. What kind of message does that send? That obedience is more important than intention? That following rules matters more than human life? In everyday life, we value intent. If someone breaks a rule to save a life or prevent harm, we usually call them a hero. But in this story, a man dies for trying to protect a sacred object from falling. Again, is that just? Is that merciful? Another troubling theme in the Bible is slavery, not just mentioned, regulated. In Exodus 21, God gives laws about how to buy and treat slaves. It even says it's okay to beat a slave, as long as they don't die right away. This isn't a metaphor. These were real instructions for owning human beings. If this were written in any other ancient book, we'd have no problem calling it immoral. But because it's in the Bible, many believers either ignore it or try to explain it away. But it's there, and it's a reflection of the kind of morality the Bible claims God supports. Let's be real. If a modern leader endorsed slavery, ordered genocides, demanded people be stoned to death for working on a Saturday, or for being gay, or for being disrespectful to their parents, we would call that leader a tyrant. We wouldn't admire them, we wouldn't worship them. Yet when these same actions are described in the Bible, we're told they are holy. And speaking of stoning, let's not forget how often the Bible prescribes the death penalty for things that are, by today's standards, either harmless or deeply personal. For example, Leviticus says a woman can be stoned for not being a virgin on her wedding night. Children can be stoned for disobeying their parents. People can be stoned for gathering firewood on the Sabbath. These aren't crimes, they're normal parts of life. Yet the God of the Bible commands death as punishment. Now you might say, but that's the Old Testament. Jesus changed everything. And yes, the New Testament is often seen as more loving. But even here we see moral problems. Jesus talks about hell more than anyone else in the Bible. Eternal torture, burning forever. For what? For not believing? For being born into the wrong religion or the wrong part of the world? Let's imagine a father tells his child, "Love me or I'll torture you forever." Would we call that love, or would we call it abuse? Love, by definition, must be freely given, not forced under threat. If we believe that God is all-powerful, then He could have created a world where everyone would come to understand truth and choose love freely. But instead, we're told most people will suffer forever, just for not believing the right thing in time. That's not justice. That's cruelty. Let's also think about real-world examples. For centuries, people used the Bible to justify slavery, to oppress women, to colonize other nations, to silence scientific progress. The church said the earth was the center of the universe and punished those who disagreed. Even today, verses are still used to attack LGBTQ people, to restrict women's rights, and to resist social change. If the Bible was written by a perfect moral being, why does it so often promote ideas that later generations reject as harmful? Now, of course, not everything in the Bible is cruel. There are beautiful verses about love, forgiveness, and compassion. But those don't erase the violent and unjust parts. And here's the key point. A book that comes from a perfect God should be better than any human moral code. It should set the highest standard. Instead, it often falls below even what we expect from flawed human beings. If someone today said they heard a voice from heaven telling them to kill their child, we'd lock them up. But when Abraham is told to sacrifice Isaac, we're told it was a test of faith. Why should blind obedience to a voice be seen as noble? What if that same test were used to justify terrorism or violence in God's name? It has been, over and over again. So what can we take from all of this? The God described in the Bible often acts in ways that we, as moral human beings, would never accept from anyone else. If these actions were committed by a king, a general, or a parent, we would call them evil, not good. Yet because we're taught to see God as holy, we excuse things that go against our deepest sense of right and wrong. Maybe the real message here isn't that God is monstrous. Maybe it's that the Bible was written by ancient people, trying to understand their world, their fears, and their place in the universe. Maybe they used God to justify wars, laws, and traditions that they couldn't explain any other way. And maybe now, with thousands of years of progress behind us, we can look back and say, this was not perfect, this was not divine, and that's okay. We don't need to believe in a cruel God to live good lives. We can choose kindness, justice, compassion, not because a book commands it, but because we understand that it's right. Morality doesn't come from fear of punishment or hope of reward. It comes from empathy, from reason, from the simple idea that other people matter. So if the God of the Bible seems morally monstrous, maybe the problem isn't with your conscience. Maybe it's with the image of God we've inherited. And maybe it's time to ask deeper questions, not to destroy faith, but to build something better, something more honest, something more human. Thanks for listening.